So let's begin the program. So Steve, thank you very much for coming to spend time with us and kind of share your perspectives and experience.
Absolutely. Here.
Okay, better. So Steve has many years experience as an engineer, entrepreneur, has had several successful exits and has been a VC for many years, and also as a partner at Venrock. So I guess to begin, maybe we can kind of talk about kind of how you got into the whole VC career.
Well, okay then. Well, hi everybody. Hope everyone got something to eat. And I was telling Olga that I'm very big on curb appeal in my life, and it doesn't have to be over the top. And I was going to say, for me, I did a few startups, and one of the things that was very important, it had to be an inviting place to come to work, because if you have to, I'm a very big carpe diem person, like live for the day and not delay gratification too much. So it's kind of nice to come to a place that sort of feels very comfortable, and I thought Olga did a very nice job on Action Spot. I think I walked in and it just feels easy to hang out here. So I think that's a nice thing. You don't always get that, so that's good. So you asked about how did I get into the VC business? It's actually, I won't give you a very long, because it's a boring story, but it comes down to this. For the most part, don't call us, we'll call you. The VC, they don't post openings. And so it happened during the 2000s, so we're talking 10 years ago or so. Most of you, no matter how old you are in the room here, you'll remember this, that there was a point where there were semiconductor companies and networking companies, and there was a clean tech peak, where people were doing solar panels and motors and electric motors and all kinds of, some of that stuff's still around. But for the most part, there were a lot of hardware investments, infrastructure investments, data centers, that kind of thing. Well, when the first bubble burst in 2000, what happened was money dried up. And when money dries up, it makes it really, really hard to do those 10-year, $100 million hardware projects, right? And it makes it much easier for all those companies that did come on the scene during the internet bubble, which were all software, right? People were, it was such new area in VC world, you call it white space. There was new markets, just every day. People will go, oh, we could build a company in that segment. We could do this, all the online advertising and e-commerce and all that sort of stuff. Well, if you're a VC firm and you're trying to attract, remember, VCs don't invest their own money. They invest the money of what you call limited partners. So when you're trying to attract Harvard University or Stanford University or California Teachers Union or all of these big institutional investors that have billions of dollars that put some percentage of those big endowments or those big savings accounts into high-risk investments like VC investments, they're looking for returns, right? And so when it became clear that there were more money to be made and quicker returns from investing in software companies rather than hardware, most of the first generation VCs who had been around since the 70s, who had been around 20 and 30 years, started having trouble funding their deals. And their Rolodexes were full of semiconductor people and networking people and data center people and clean tech people, and couldn't get them, they basically couldn't get LPs to put money in funds to do those deals. So as that started to dry up, VC started to move more towards software. People retired. So a lot of first generation VCs, a lot of people just got out of the business. And at Venrock, we had 4 senior partners that left. Well, all of a sudden, there were 15 orphaned companies in those segments that I described that had no board member. So, lucky me. I was minding my own business working at Trimble Navigation, one of my favorite jobs. I actually worked there twice. I worked there early in my career, and then when my last startup was done, I went back. So I'm minding my own business. I'm kind of a mid-level manager running a project for the next generation of GPS. So I have my security clearances. I'm working with Raytheon and General Dynamics and the government. It was pretty geeky. It was fun. The phone rings and it's Venrock. This is 2008, late 2008. Steve, we've got 15 orphan companies. They're all right up your alley. Would you join the firm, sit on the boards, help us do diligence on deals, et cetera, et cetera. Make your own job, just take care of these things on the side. So I came home and I told my wife, and she said, well, you got, it's the bird in the hand versus, right? And so I had this job and I was happy and whatever, and I said, when in the world would you ever get that phone call? I didn't know any other VCs that well. And by the way, I'm sorry, the important part is Venrock had been the investor in 2 of the companies that I ran. So I knew them really well. And several years earlier, I was an entrepreneur in residence at Venrock, so they knew me. So when they came up with the list of people that could potentially be this operating partner that would come in and help us, I was on the top of the list. So in 24 hours, we decided you can't turn that one down. That's the answer. So I was kind of an accidental thing. I had no intention of ever being a VC. I still like the title operating partner better because I like being closer to get my hands dirty. That's sort of me.
Okay, well, no, thank you very much. Good story. So what about the startups that you've been involved in? I guess like you had 2 successful exits.
He's overstating it. I'm modest. So I was not particularly successful. So there were 4 companies. So 2 of them were turnarounds where venture capitalists called me and said, Steve, as a matter of fact, I was an engineer for 20 years and then got promoted. There's another story there. And got promoted, worked my way up. And I was vice president, general manager of a wireless company in 1996 that had a sister division that was in internet security. So there were kind of 2 divisions. So I ran one, the CEO ran the other. So it was the 2 of us. We went public on NASDAQ in 1996. That was a good thing for me. All right, so I didn't get filthy rich, but enough to buy a house in Cupertino, which I still live in. Okay, so that was good. That's a good thing. When that happens, what I didn't know is that's when everybody sees your name on the S1 registration statement. So you're an executive at a company that just went public. So the VC started calling, Steve, we've got an opportunity for you. Would you be our CEO at this company or that company? I was very naive. And I didn't realize that most of those calls were from VCs who had struggling companies that had issues. Well, we could talk about that later. And I got a call from a very well-known VC. It was actually an NEA deal. It was a very famous guy named Dick Kramlich. He founded NEA. It's one of the biggest VC firms in the world. They have like $3 billion funds at any one time. So he calls me up in person. I don't even know who he is. And he says, we've got this company in Santa Rosa, satellite components. Well, my whole life, we're kind of a little out of order, but the short version is, I was a ham radio operator as a kid, 13 years old, and I basically turned my hobby into my career. I've always been a wireless, kind of techie, embedded systems guy. So that had always sort of been my specialty. So they had a company that was doing satellite components. So they said, Steve, we need someone to help us turn this company around. I should have turned around and ran the other way. It was not a happy ending. But what I would say is, with hindsight and how many years? 20 years of perspective, it got me into the early stage investment VC world. Learned what it was like to be a CEO with a board of directors, whatever. The net was the product had negative gross margins and never was able to get past that. So we sold the assets. I mean, that's basically what it came down to. But I learned a lot, and then it was good. I did another turnaround, not chronologically, but another one that's more related to the world today, and you'll all appreciate it. You know what video analytics are? It's an easy thing to explain. It's basically computer vision. So I ran, it was a spin out of NEC, the big Japanese company, that did computer vision in the physical security space. So let's say Action Spot at night wants to make sure that nobody gets in and steals the computers or messes with anything here. So you put up video cameras. The problem with video cameras is you need someone to look at the video. And clearly you could record the video, and for forensics, for sort of looking back in time, you could see it's like you see on the TV shows. Oh, there was somebody crawling, they got the hoodie on, and well, after the fact and everything's stolen, it's too late. So this company was about real-time alerts. If a person was climbing over a fence, or someone walking the wrong direction in the exit lane at the airport, right? Or for advertising, people walking around a department store, it could track where people walked, and therefore you'd know where to put display cases for certain products. So it was a neural network-based back end for a video camera that basically looked for people. So you trained it on heads and arms and legs. So the cool thing was it wouldn't false alarm on dogs or deer or trees blowing like motion sensors, right? Like the most simple video analytics or machine vision is just like a motion sensor, but it's not specific enough and a lot of false alarms. The net here was, and this will make you smile, what we did, the processor we used was made by another startup called Stream Processors. It's not around anymore, it was back then. The hardware cost $5,000. I gave you all those different examples. It would do only one of them. You had to design it to do only one, so we called it one behavior. $500 for the video camera, $5,000 for one behavior, right? And who's going to buy that? San Francisco Airport has 1,500 cameras. It would take the entire U.S. budget to put enough video analytics from our company called Vidiant. It would never happen. We sold a few units to TSA. That was my other turnaround attempt. That one also, assets sold. It was just way too early. It took 30 days to train it, to train the neural network, the deep learning, 30 days to train it. And as I said, it took, I think the number was 20 gigaops for one behavior. Today, you could do exactly what we did in 10 milliseconds on the iPhone. So that's kind of the 10 years ago and now. So that was my other big success, right? Which was not a success. The third one was a really fun one, and it was one I started. It was called Data Runway, and it was basically a wireless thing. How many of you have flown and used the internet on the plane? You've seen GoGo? It was a direct competitor to GoGo. GoGo uses old cell phone channels that they bought. It's a very small amount of frequency. You don't get a lot of bandwidth. You can't do streaming. You can't do video. You can do email. You can do some things. They're working on next generation stuff. But at the time, this is somewhere around 2008, 7 or 8, we came up with an idea that worked in the Wi-Fi band, so it was unlicensed. We could do 10 megabits to a given airplane at 100 miles. And so it was smart antenna based, so we could steer antenna beams electronically, and they would track the airplanes in flight. My partner got his master's degree at MIT, and he specialized in tracking military aircraft in his former life. Brilliant guy. We built a prototype for $500,000, friends and family. We got every airline in the world fired up because they all hated GoGo, and the consumers did. But this is the time when there's still low uptake. And I remember exactly when it was 2007. What happened in 2008? They almost went all bankrupt because fuel prices, oil went to $150 a barrel. Lucky me. I mean, I could blame someone. I won't blame anyone. I can laugh about it now. But the fact was, we had this prototype. We had everybody ready to go. We were out to raise money. The crash happens. Half of our customers are about to go bankrupt. We're talking United Airlines. We had to deal with Lufthansa and everything. So anyway, it turns out right about that time, I got the call from Venrock. My partner actually didn't give up. Bless his heart. He's a real entrepreneur. He changed the model. Cruise ships get their internet from satellites. And if you've ever been, I've never been on a cruise, but apparently the data rate is very slow. And you can do email, but it's not very good. It's very expensive. Well, most ships cruise within 50 miles of the shore, but microwave transmitters don't work well because of the waves and all of the problems there are. So this technology corrected for that. So it's called TruePath Wireless, and there are base stations in the Caribbean and the Mediterranean that use exactly our technology. And he built about a $20 million a year business out of it. So bless his heart. And then the other one was a company that there was a period of time when DSL and cable were just starting, right? And everyone was trying to figure out how you did the last mile. Well, DSL for a while, I don't know if you remember, some of you will remember, the problem was cable, they had too many homes on one cable. And so at night when everybody came home, your internet speed just dropped, all right? On DSL, it turns out it didn't work at every house, and the further you were from the node, you still have that today actually. There's a lot of AT&T customers still on DSL. It doesn't work very well. As a matter of fact, in the villages, yep. I got my mom off it finally. We got on Comcast. It was terrible. And so anyway, there was a period of time when both cable and DSL were struggling. To send a service truck to your house to figure out how to get it to work cost $200 every time. They call it a truck roll. Both the cable people and DSL folks were going broke. So the VCs jumped in quick, started half a dozen companies. One of them was mine. It was called Co-Wave Networks, to do last mile overlay, to do wireless to your house. And it was a mesh network based solution. I'm sure today you see all the commercials on TV, like what's it called? EER, what's the Wi-Fi mesh networking product on TV? EERO. Is that right? EERO. And there's Plume, there's a few others. Ours was a wide area mesh as opposed to a local area mesh that they're using in the house. Mesh networking isn't easy to do. We had 10 patents, we had everybody excited about it. And then, in the end, DSL and cable figured it out, right? We know today DSL was relatively successful. Cable, mostly we use that now. So the wireless things just were too expensive. At first we were cheaper, and then the other prices just dropped. So another one of my great company ideas, But it was good. We merged with another company, figured out a way to use the technology for something else, longer story. And that one, again, had some success. We sold several thousand units. It was basically, in the cable industry, if you think about it, for the most part, cable serves homes, and the telephone companies serve businesses. Not too many businesses have cable, restaurants do. But historically, that's been the split. The LECs, the local exchange carriers, AT&T, Verizon, they serve businesses, cable serves homes. There was a period of time, just when we were starting this company, when they decided to poach on each other. They were both feeling so bad about their own businesses, like, woe is me, my cable business isn't doing well. Woe is me, the business, it takes too long to trench and put fiber to a business. Let's go steal the other guy's business. So we actually made a wireless product that allowed cable companies to deliver cable wirelessly to dentist's office and 7-Elevens and people who weren't on the cable plant. Because you know where the cable goes, down the neighborhoods. But if you're one block over at a strip mall, there's no cable. And it was taking months for AT&T to put new internet into businesses. So we came up with this idea. And we got every cable company in the United States to buy it. We sold thousands of units. And then eventually voice over IP came along and video on demand came along. And they decided, why should we compete with AT&T? We're making a fortune selling to consumers. So the business kind of went like this. And again, we sold it. But it was, it's kind of the changing technologies. It's kind of a takeaway that if you've got a business idea and it seems like a good one, you only have a certain, there's a half-life. And you gotta get there and hopefully have an exit before things change.
No, thank you very much, Steve. So yeah, exactly. So I think a lot of the entrepreneurs in the room also can attest to, you may have a good idea, and sometimes you may have an idea and an implementation too early for the market to bear, right? Or timing, or whatever conditions, right, may happen. So it's not that, it's all timing. Part of it is luck. And of course, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, right? Okay. Well, I guess maybe going back to kind of what is the current climate from an investment side, and what areas does Venrock look at and invest in or consider?
Sure. It's kind of one answer, and it's not supposed to be embarrassing, so I can tell you, but the answer is pretty much all the VCs are made up of smart people who have had the similar experiences and see the same things. A lot of us entrepreneurs, I'm going to put my entrepreneur hat on. I've always felt like I was never, even at Venrock, it's hard for me to say I'm a VC. I sort of, start to cough. This like chokes me up because I'm really an entrepreneur that landed in a VC office. But the fact is, a lot of people say, oh, those VCs, they're like lemmings. They all go after the same thing. They don't like this and they all like that. Well, I can tell you now that I've been on both sides, there's a really good reason that a lot of VCs chase certain companies and don't chase others. And that's because they all have the same model. And if a company comes along in a business area that's moving quickly, there's a wave, and there's value to be built, and there's a successful team, right? They're all running to that company. It's not because, oh, Joe's running over there, so I better run over there too. Or Venrock's running there, so NEA and Sequoia should go there too. They're all scanning the same things. And we can talk about what that is in 2 seconds here, but they're all scanning the same things. So from one perspective, it looks like they're all, if one person sees something, the rest of them just run the same direction. It's not exactly like that. It's because everybody's searching. If I told all of you, find the way out of this room, you'd all scan around and you'd see the open door right there. You did it independently. It's not like you followed anybody else. You did your scan and you said, that's the direction. It's the way VCs work. So it can be, for those of us, I've had several, I told you some stories. You go through the different cycles. It can be frustrating because you might be in a business that's just not on a wave. And it's like everyone's ignoring you. But it helped me over the last 10 years, I would say, now that I'm living on the other side, to understand why that was. In terms of what's hot now, I'm not going to tell you anything you don't know. AI is pervasive, and we can talk more about that. I follow that real closely because of my own personal interest. And then I'm just under AI, I'll put, automotive, autonomous vehicles, drones, robots. Let's just put all of that. Some of the mechanical stuff from robots, the mechatronics kind of stuff is a little different, but for the most part, it's kind of an AI problem. So that's all in one area. I would say healthcare has been big, at least in the West, mostly because I would say it's very, obviously there was some political stuff with the Obama administration and Obamacare that opened up some opportunities, for digital health and healthcare IT. But I would say also, as slow as the government works and the healthcare system works, it just took cloud computing. There is issues with healthcare and cloud computing because of security, but you can have on-prem clouds as much as you can have, public clouds. I think the whole cloud computing, there's the whole cellular, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, ubiquitous connectivity. You can have wearable, we're just talking about wearable devices. You can have all of the connectivity in the hospital. So I think healthcare is big. Half of what we do is healthcare. And then I would say, what are the other big areas? I would say, so let's say fintech. I would say fintech and security. I would say two more. So security, I always saw it as an insurance play. You have to put stuff in just to be prepared, just in case. It's become more than that. I mean, I think all of us recognize Equifax thing. I mean, it doesn't seem like, I give these talks on panels all the time, and every time I'm on a panel, there's a different, major, whether it's Target or eBay or the U.S. government was a couple of years ago. I got like a 3, how many of you in the room got notified by the U.S. government? Because I guess I was in the system for my clearances. I get free fraud detection, it's the identity theft protection from the government. I think I got 3 or 5 years free because someone hacked into one of the government agencies and as we're really sorry we screwed up, here's a 5-year subscription to this particular service. But I mean, security is in the VC world, it's the gift that keeps on giving. There's exit after exit, billion-dollar exit after billion-dollar exit. And then fintech, it's sort of another ubiquitous service and things, just making it easier. I mean, banks, I needed to transfer more than $10,000. I was moving some investment money from Citibank to a Morgan Stanley account. This is like last week. And first I tried to just do the electronic transfer. Well, there was a limit. You could only do $1,000. And then I did it, and I followed the directions, typing in, I tried to do a wire transfer. Well, the bank gave me one set of information, and Morgan Stanley gave me another set. I tried to do it. It went and came back to me. It actually went out, and then 10 minutes later, it got deposited in the same account I sent it from. So obviously, I messed up. I put the numbers in the wrong place. But all I wanted to do was transfer money. I spent like 3 hours on it, and I was so frustrated. I finally gave up. I went to my local branch, and I say, could you please wire transfer? It took her an hour to do one transfer, of a couple tens of thousands of dollars. That needs to get, and I asked, it was really funny. It was a very nice young woman, and I was relaxed, and I knew it was gonna take more than half an hour. So I'm sitting there, and she had the screen to the back of me, and I said, this is taking an awful long time because I know you can do it electronically online, and it only took me 5 minutes. Now I know I did it wrong, but why is it taking you a half hour? Oh, the online software is not the same as the software we use in the branch. It was old DOS-based stuff, like from 20 years ago at Citibank. They hadn't upgraded that yet. So she's got the black screen with the cursor moving, and that was the branch at Citibank like 3 days ago. So fintech is a really big deal. And as we know, many countries in the world live their lives on their cell phones, right? Just because of cost of living and just, per capita GDP. They don't have computers. They do all the transactions on their cell phones. They purchase things, they do everything. And so those, the whole Bitcoin thing and all of that. So that's pretty big. So I would say those are kind of the hot ones. Everything else is still there.
Do you have any advice for entrepreneurs out there who are seeking funding and they may have done, friends and family, bootstrap, but then they may have done a seed or had angel rounds? When should they consider coming to a venture capitalist? Or
Okay.
when do you think they'll be ready? And it varies from person to person and company.
Yeah, and company to company. So, great question. And I think, I say this every time I speak, that the venture community, shame on them. They're the worst marketeers, period. They may have money, and they're probably good at getting money from LPs because every couple of years they get more money. But there isn't a single reason why they shouldn't be able to make it easy for you all and for all of us entrepreneurs to know how to present and pitch to them and get the money. Because I think the joke out there is, I don't know what they want, I don't understand. How many people are in the pitch business, teaching you how to write your pitches, and why is this so hard? And all I can tell you is, and it's kind of a funny thing, the people who became VCs were VCs for one reason, they're not marketers. That's not what they went to college for. And for the most part, venture capitalists are not team players. I don't mean they're bad people, but they're cowboys. I'm the science person, there's the fintech person, there's the health tech person. We have our partner meetings on Monday, but nobody has employees. Most VCs are individual contributors. They just do their own thing within the partnership. It's not a corporation. There's no bosses. Yes, we have some people work for some people, but for the most part, most people have no direct reports, right? And they're not good at marketing. They're not good at corporate stuff. Venture capitalist firms are not corporations. So they're just not good at it. So that's the sad part. The good part is, if you ask and if you go out of your way to find out, the information won't be withheld from you. It seems like it's a secret. It's not a secret. What you say about your company is so heavily discounted. I'll just turn it around. If I was trying to raise money from you, and I say, I've got this wireless company, it's the coolest thing, and we built this, and we did this, and we wrote this software, and we built this gadget, and it does this. I'm conflicted. It's my baby. I'm gonna say everything I can to tell you how wonderful it is. It's like getting a reference from your mother. It's nice, it's just not worth very much, because she's gonna say nice things about you, where she's supposed to. So So what I would tell you is in the climate we live today, the biggest single thing you can do is have people that are going to write the check for your product validate it. That's the key. It's not about sales orders. You can raise $20 million with a startup in the right market. Pick a number, 30 million, whatever. Series A's aren't that big, but you can raise a lot of money on companies that have no revenue, that might even be a couple years away. It's all about the demand from your customers. And I can't emphasize that enough. No matter how much your pitch talks about, it does this feature and it does it, it doesn't matter it matters to some degree. You have to be articulate. You have to be thoughtful. You have to be organized. I mean, all of those things, because you're going to get married to your investors for 10 years. Remember, the average time to M&A is 6 to 8 years, and the average time to IPO is 8 to 10 years. And in venture firms, it's worse than, many of you probably heard this joke, it's harder to get rid of a venture investor than it is to get divorced from your partner. And I'm not joking. It's just you can't. There's no mechanism. If they don't want to leave, you can't get rid of them. You just can't. You can go bankrupt, and I guess there's a way to do it then, but other than that, you're getting married, and it's marriage probably isn't even a good word. You are linked, and that's it. That's why if companies don't work out, it's better to restart than trying to patch the old one, because you can't get rid of the players that aren't playing nice. So the question was, what advice do I have? So that was the first piece of advice. The second piece of advice is just keep asking questions until you understand. I'll leave this one on a positive note. What's happened in the last 5 years or so, certainly after the last bubble burst, which is, I don't know if 2008 was a bubble burst, it was more of a financial crisis, but after the last 10 years, it's been a steady bull market, right? The investment landscape has broadened dramatically. I was saying this, Olga filmed us for a 5-minute thing for her website, I guess, and Avery was asking me about the investment landscape. Yes, there's VCs. I tell people I don't think VCs have changed in 30 years. Venrock hasn't. We had 10 investing partners 30 years ago, and we have 10 investing partners today. Sequoia's not that much bigger. Andreessen's newer. NEA maybe a little bit bigger. Most VC firms don't change. There's no incentive to grow. You just raise money, deploy it, raise money, deploy it. Why do you need, if you're comfortable with the team you've got and you're already making X dollars a year, why do you need to hire more people for them to make X dollars a year? It's not the goal. It's not a corporation. So there's VCs, I don't think changed at all. The market has been so good, the stock market, you've got these, yes and no. The market's been steadily going up, but returns, at least in banks, our interest rates are very low. There's a lot of private equity firms, when I say on the high side, people who write bigger checks, $50, $100 million, private equity and hedge funds. There's so much activity in the early stage markets, and there's so many opportunities. They've started to come down and make direct investments. They used to make investments into VC firms as limited partners. Now they're just doing them directly. So places like Uber, and when they do these ridiculous rounds, WeWork, the co-working space, they get money from these huge entities that invest directly. On the low side, angels pretty much they disappeared in 2000 because all of the little fragile companies that died that weren't very good investments, the angel investors lost all their money and just went away. Started to come back now, I think, more educated and smarter. Plus what we've seen is two other things that are different than we've ever had before. Incubators and accelerators. So this is people that help companies get started. And there's all kinds of models where they give you free space, or they give you $50,000 and train you for 6 months or 4 months or whatever. Really cool, right? You get firsthand knowledge of what the VCs want to see, because the goal is to get the VCs to invest in you. And the final thing is, because the stock market's done so well for 10 years, where's all the money? It's in corporate coffers. I mean, how much money does Apple have? How much money does Google have? Obscene amounts of money. Most corporations in the world today have a ridiculous amount of cash. Well, they can't put it in the bank at 1% or 0.5%, so they're looking for places to deploy it. So there's more corporate VCs now than there's ever been in the history of the world. And every week, or probably not every week, but every month I hear about a new one. 7-Eleven has one. New York Life Insurance Company has one. Caterpillar, the industrial, the guys that make the heavy construction equipment, they have one. I mean, the companies in the world that you'd never think of that have VC firms, that have VC arms, they've got them. All the telephone companies have them. All the cable companies have them. All the banks have them. They all have their own VC firms. And they'll invest. Now, there are challenges to taking money from a company versus kind of a pure play financial player like a VC. But you can do it and you can make it work. They say 1/3 of the investments today in early stage companies come from corporates. About 1/3. That's huge and a big opportunity. And they're not that good at deal flow. So if you show up on their doorstep with a real credible deal, you can get funded.
Thank you. So at this point, I'd like to open up to the audience for any questions, since I'm sure you might have some questions for Steve.
Hi, Steve. I have done several VC deals in the past, but I've never done corporate investment. It used to be very difficult to do that. As far as from a fundraising goes, are there any significant differences in terms of approaches or what they're looking for between the corporate investor versus traditional venture capital?
So I think you all heard the question about corporate investing. So first of all, you need to separate corporate investment in two buckets, from their venture arm and from the corporate entity. So if you have a division of Microsoft that likes your AR/VR unit, they might invest directly from the division, versus Microsoft Ventures might invest in you kind of like a VC would. There are slight differences. The most important thing about getting money from strategics is they have ulterior motives. We don't as a VC. We just want to make money. The only metric in a VC firm, all the ones I've mentioned, is IRR and cash on cash return. Good news and bad news. The good news is it's very simple. Our motives are to make money. We want you to get rich, so we get rich. And it's a win-win thing. If we ever do a deal and you felt slighted when we make money, you think people are going to come back? It's just like a restaurant when the food's not good. Doesn't last long. So the VCs that have been around for decades are the ones that only do the win-win thing. Because otherwise, where's our deal flow come from? Comes from the entrepreneurs that did the deal 10 years ago with us, had a big exit, and want to do it again. So return business is really big. Corporates have alternative. They're basically motivated to make their business successful, not yours. So maybe to make their business successful, they don't want you to be successful, but they're going to invest so they can keep an eye on you. That's kind of the worst case. The middle case would be they want to keep an eye on you, and maybe they'd be willing to have you move along so they get some free R&D. And in their best case, if they really like what you're doing, they buy you. The problem is if you only had one investor and it was that corporate, then you're beholden to them. It's like having to sell something and you only have one buyer. We all know what that's like. You don't have a lot of negotiating leverage. If you have multiple corporates, then they're fighting with each other, and as the CEO of the company, you're pulling your hair out. If you have financial investors and a corporate investor, then you have investors on your board who have different motives, which is never good. Now you have conflicting. So it's tricky. People do it every day. You have to split your board meetings into an open and closed session, or a conflicted and an unconflicted session. You have to be careful what information, you have to excuse people from the room when you're talking about their competitor, because their competitor might be your customer. So there's all these things there's just this list. Is it doable? Absolutely. Is it a little bit of a headache? Yes. If that's the way you got into business and you got the money and you were able to make your company go, you do it.
Hi, Steve. My name is Charles Baxley.
Hi.
I'm an entrepreneur. So 6 months ago, we're actively raising funds.
Okay.
We had made over $500,000 in sales in less than 4 months.
Great.
One thing we got often from VCs was, you are a bit too early. So what does that exactly mean?
Yeah, so that's kind of touching on it. So when a VC says you're too early, what does that mean? Okay. The VC speak, all right? So keep in mind one thing. The last thing a VC wants to do is turn a deal down and then a year later have the other VC firm down the street do the deal and make $1 billion. And as we all know, stranger things have happened in Silicon Valley. You just never know who the next the winner is. You just don't. Cruise Automation, this guy who, I saw that deal. I wasn't the only person that saw it, but he drove into the Venrock parking lot with his prototype autonomous vehicle conversion kit and wanted investment. And I'm the tech automotive guy at Venrock. And I said, oh God, you're one guy too early. And a year later, he sells himself to GM for $1 billion. Guess I missed that one. But that was one of those fluke things you just don't know. So what does it mean when a VC says it's too early? I would say two different things. VC's never gonna say no because they want you to come back. Okay, so that's the trick. Half the time they won't give you a reason because they don't want to insult you and they don't want to get on your bad side. So the typical way you tell if it's a no from a VC is if they don't call back. And they're people too, and we'd say the vast majority are no different than we are. They're nice people and they don't want to insult you. It's hard to say, I don't want to invest in your company. So they just say, well, stay in touch. It's hard. Everybody comes up with their own style on how to say no. It's like in life. It's hard to say no. You asked me about we're too early. I'm going to answer the question in the context of you really are too early. So what does too early mean? Let's assume it's a very big market because VCs in general only invest in large markets, $500 million, $2 billion markets. And the reason is when you have a $500 million fund and you invest in 30 or 40 companies every 3 or 4 years, trust me on this, the math is if you don't have 1 or 2 companies out of those 30 that get to $1 billion in value, it doesn't cover all the losses. And it doesn't give you enough of a return to get your investors to be excited. So you need a couple big winners. So I'm assuming the market's big enough. Doesn't really matter. I've given an answer to everybody. Market's big enough. You've got a solid team. It may simply be that you're not developed enough and the investors determine if there's true traction. So for example, I always say this is kind of a stupid statement, 1 point doesn't make a line. So if you just have one trial customer and they really like it, we don't know, is that a fluke? Is it just because you circled for 2 years and found the one company that needed what you were doing? Or is that just the beginning of just an avalanche of business? So the single biggest thing we care about is there a big market and have you found a problem that you can solve? Are you differentiated, but can you solve a problem? So early, when I say early, it's just, we can't tell if, I'll give you an example though. We all know WhatsApp, right? What did that sell for to Facebook? Is it Facebook or what's it? 19 billion or some ridiculous 37 employees or 68 employees sold for a ridiculous amount. And I think they only really had one big investor was Sequoia. I don't know the exact story. I only know enough to know that person bet real early on that deal. So arguably, if you get lucky and you bet early, you might get by. But most VCs make this risk-return trade-off because the multiples are so high. Think about it this way. If I gamble, and I don't know whether it's $5 million, we're kind of a $5 to $10 million first check, 20 million in maximum life for the company. That's for a fund size of 500 million. So that's the way we get 30 companies. Spread it out. And then we recycle some. If we get an exit early, we put the money back in and reinvest it. Oh, we were talking about, getting into early. So if we put 5 million in, and let's say the exit was $1 billion, we have to take a bunch of risk because you're too early. Why don't I just wait till your next round? And even though I'm only going to get half of what I got in terms of, because your value has gone up, and so your dollars per share that we have to buy, maybe you're selling shares today at $1 a share, but I think it's too early, so I wait till next year in your B round, and it's $2 a share. So for my $10 million, I get half as much. I get half the percentage of the company. Well, if you're ultimately going to be worth $1 billion, whether I paid 5 million or 10 million for the shares, it's still a fantastic return, and my risk might drop by 10x. So, when you're looking for such big multiples, for me, or not for me, but for VCs, the difference between getting a 50x or a 25x, they're both so fantastic that why don't I just lower my risk on the front end? That's kind of the way you look at it.
Right.
So how do you introduce your product to a government or a public institution? Okay, so I would give you a general answer, which is, as we all know, it's really hard to cold call, right? I mean, the return rate it's like sending out a blast of emails and you get 2 or 3% back. If you're gonna do that in real life where you're gonna give presentations cold, you could do a lot of driving and a lot of travel and not get much return. So what I would say about governments, I would say about corporations, if you're a startup, you gotta find a champion. You've gotta somehow go to conferences, go to places where your potential customers are, find someone who's in love with your product, and get that person to work from the inside to help you. I would say it's not possible, and you might get lucky. But I think in my own personal experience, overwhelmingly, I've done better by finding someone who's inside, who's a friend of a friend or a relative or somebody who's motivated for you to be successful, and they work it from the inside. And I think in governments and public entities, given that they don't have a lot of money, they're big bureaucracies, unless you have help on the inside knowing who the decision makers are, what the budget cycles are, I think it's really hard. And by the way, in the case of public entities and governments, that's why most venture capitalists don't invest in companies that have those as customers. They move too slowly, they're too opaque. You can't see inside them. So find a champion. And that's really important across the board. It's important to us too, because if we know someone inside likes it, we tend to trust them. It's that unconflicted entity.
We're in an interesting time with all these currencies,
Yes.
and so it's a whole different level of valuation from a company, a currency. And so and I do see investments in these currencies, but are you seeing venture capitalists invest in currencies, and what gives currencies their value? What are the earmarks of a successful
like the
currency?
Bitcoin kind of
Yeah.
Yeah, so I would say, with a few exceptions, and you read about it in the paper. So keep in mind, if you're the fintech person at a venture company, remember there's only one dimension that matters to VCs. Cash on cash return, or IRR, how fast you make your money. That's all. Not what and oh, by the way, there's certain limitations. No pornography, no weapons, no drugs, no cannabis. Our limited partners in general give us a set of things that they don't want to be associated with. And they give us the money, and we sign a contract, and we say we won't do deals in those areas. Given that, so fintech is free reign, everybody likes that, and we have no restrictions, okay, so we can invest in anything like that. But there's a lot of hype around, alternative currencies. And for the most part, I mean, you guys are probably up on this more than I am. At some point recently, in the last 6 months, didn't the government of China just ban Bitcoin completely? I mean, not that changes the Western view, but the net is there are a lot of regulations in the banking industry, right? And I've been looking at it for about 5 years. I'm not the fintech guy, but I work closely with the guy at Venrock that does it, and I see the deals when they come in. I don't know how many big exits there have been. I don't think many. I mean, there's been exits in the transaction companies, the Venmos and the PayPals and that kind of stuff. But in terms of the pure currencies, I've been reading all kinds of stuff about the initial coin offering stuff, and it's still kind of out there. It's sort of out on the side. And I would say most venture cap, never say always, never say never, but most venture capitalists are fairly conservative people. Even though it says venture capital and you think we're big risk takers, that's not really true. That's a total misnomer. We're kind of bankers, and as everybody knows, bankers are conservative. Now we take risks, we take market risk. We don't take regulatory risk. Nobody bets on the US government saying this is going to be good or that's good. If there's regulatory risk, we almost wait until the regulations happen. There are certain things that we just don't bet on. So in answer to your question, I'm not an expert in that area. I only know enough to know that when we've looked at them, and we've looked at a various number of things, you have to have some sense that, see, the funds are 10 years long. We invest for about 3 years, and then for the rest of the 10, we invest about half in the first round of funding in these 30 companies, and then the second half we're reserved for follow-on rounds. So if I invest in Avery's company today, in a couple of years he's going to need more money. So he's going to go find a new investor, but then the other investors have to continue to put money in to support him, to show our support. So we keep about half in reserve. So it's a 10-year fund, and at the end of 10 years, we hope that everything is exited, or we sell off those assets, or we try to, you can build extensions into them. At Venrock, we can have up to 2 one-year extensions, so they go like 12 years. And most of our older funds, by 12 years, almost all the companies are gone. If you believe that there's an industry that's going to take longer than 10 years to develop, we're probably not going to invest because we can't get out. Like a lot of healthcare things, new drug development we typically don't get in at the beginning. We wait until you have certain clinical trials, that have been passed, because otherwise, if you start from the beginning, it takes too long. I read an article, and I think this is generally true. University research to IPO in almost any area is about 20 years. So investing in pure university research as a venture firm, you'll never get there. And I think in the banking industry, it's kind of a little bit like that. It just moves really slow.
My question is around AI and ML.
Yep.
So there's a lot of discussion about AI and ML. And my question is regarding insurance. So insurance, if you think about it, it's primarily modeling risk.
It absolutely is.
And,
The actuarial tables, you mean
Right.
life risk, any kind of insurance.
Right.
They don't take any chances at all. They play the statistics. It's like the house and the casinos. They know over a large number of trials, they know exactly how many times 7 comes up. They're not betting on anything. It's a sure thing.
So it's about taking a few data parameters and like modeling
Yes,
risk.
yes.
And so kind of keeping that in mind, sounds like one of the biggest disruptive areas for AI and ML should be insurance. Like, I mean, there's a lot more data streams right now. You can predict risk a lot better.
And I think that's absolutely true. As a matter of fact, I'm on the board of an automotive company that does vehicle-to-vehicle communications. In other words, ultimately, either autonomous vehicles or even our own cars will probably have 2 or 3 cell phones in them, and there'll be, some of the information based on, well, you can do it now. Everybody's seen the commercial with Flo from Progressive, the funny commercials about, I forget what their product is called, but it's what?
Nationwide insurance?
No, I was talking about the onboard diagnostic, the OBD plug-in that's got GPS and cellular in it, and it monitors your car speed and where you drive and whatever, and they'll adjust your rates if you're willing to be monitored. California doesn't allow it yet, but many states do. And so that's not even a machine learning thing. That's just a direct, if you do fast stops and starts and rolling stops and this and that, they know to charge you more, and they predict that. But I I was saying I'm on the board of this company that's doing this vehicle-to-vehicle communications to warn you if the bridge is out ahead or it's slippery ice or blind left turns can tell you if another car is coming around the corner. We're going to have that in 5 or 10 years. I hope sooner for this company's sake, but it'll happen soon enough. But we've been contacted by lots of insurance companies that want to buy the data from the driving data to help them predict better driving. So if the question is this important in insurance? 110% absolutely. The insurance companies are all over it. Yeah. And I would say there's been more insurance companies in technology in the last 5 years than there's ever been. So I think they're becoming more sophisticated in terms of early stage technologies. One of the problems with companies, especially public companies, kind of the ones we're talking about, is they have quarterly earnings they have to give. And so any kind of overhead they do, they're very sensitive to expenses, right? And so for them to deal with startups is sort of counter to their whole persona, because startups, one, I always say you can't legislate science, right? So you don't know when a startup is going to make it. So you're burning cash, and they're trying to tell their shareholders that they're making money. It's hard. It's hard for most corporations to deal with not knowing when a startup is going to have a hockey stick, and the insurance industry is no different. There's another company I'm associated with that's dealing with security risk, and it has to do with how secure is your network and how likely are you to be hacked. And if you knew that, you'd be able to determine what kind of cyber insurance you could sell, which is kind of now becoming a real big deal. And I'm not sure how much it's AI and machine learning, but it's a combination of, it's more about, actually it's not an answer to your question, but it's more about understanding the network and how vulnerable you are. But the answer is absolutely yes, and if you're in that business, insurance companies will have their door open.
If no more questions at the moment, what we'll do is we're going to have a networking mingling time, so you'll get a chance to meet with Steve. But basically, be respectful. You don't want to pitch on the spot unless Steve, kind of gives you the signal to do that. But just introduce yourself, what your company is, and then maybe just get his contact information.
Let me help you with that one.
Okay.
So look, my email is steve@venrock.com, not a secret. And the way it works is, and this is good for you to know, because everybody gets taught about your elevator pitch and all that kind of stuff. The reality is, yes, you have to convince me, but I have to convince my partners. So I kind of shortcut that. And not every VC is like this, but me in particular. The best thing to do is to write a one-page exec summary. And I got trained that way. I mean, I've been at Venrock as a VC for almost 10 years. And that's the way we sort of do things. We get an exec summary. If I think it's interesting, I'll circulate it to my partners, because every investment is a unanimous vote. And so I have to convince them, right? The other thing I can do for you is, even if I think it's not a Venrock thing, I can give you some feedback, right? Which I gladly do. And so it actually is hard for me to sort of hear the pitch standing up in an environment like this. But first of all, I'd love to meet any of you. You want to chat after we're done. But just send me an exec summary to steve@venrock.com. I will, if you tell me what you're going to send me, I will remember. There's one good thing, I don't forget the companies. They're all different. I think I've seen about 500 companies a year for 8.5 years. So that's 4,000 or 5,000 companies. And I don't remember everybody's name if I see them in a different context around town, but I never forget the companies. So I guess that's a good thing in this business. So I won't forget you. Anyway, that's good.
Well, thank you again, Steve.